6th time to this conference, where our agenda...
Yes.
Good. What we do here is we discuss the transformation of our city in this dynamic period of the information revolution. This is a really critical moment in the history of Chicago, and it's a very good thing that we have this conference to help us digest it. So what I want to ask you to do first is to please look at the cover of your conference program. We put some thought into what we wrote, and we want to make sure everybody learns it. First of all, our commitment this year is planning for change based on high-speed internet. We've seen a lot of federal spending and several high-speed internet projects. Now it's time to plan for change on that new infrastructure. Just to recap, President Obama took office in January 2009. There was a $787 billion stimulus bill, of which $7.2 billion went for high-speed internet. $350 million of that was awarded for internet construction and related activity in Illinois, and then much more was applied in local match dollars, and all that funding ends January 1st, 2013. What will have been accomplished? What has it meant for the digital divide? What will be sustainable? And given answers to all those questions, what are we going to do about it? For 6 years, eChicago has brought campus and community together to talk about critical issues facing all of us. eChicago comes out of community informatics. It asks how local communities and social institutions use computers and the internet, especially in Black, Latino, and lower-income communities. It's about ending digital divides and seeing how the community can use cyber power to end racism and poverty. The public library is the #1 institution providing free computer access in the community, so we care about the past, present, and future of a public library. And eChicago always links Chicago's inner cities with the suburbs and with city, county, and state government. So it's always about a more digital and more democratic Chicago plan. In light of these new internet speeds, there's 2 things we want to put before you. First of all, something old, hip-hop, the most live form of global culture that is rooted in digital tools. Last year, we kicked off our Respect for Rap with a plenary presentation by Cap D of All Natural, and he really killed it. And that's online, so you can look at it. This year, we've got a full session with strong cultural forces in the community search for cyber power. Point 2, something new, local wikis, which we see as an easy new move towards a community information commons. The corporation is fully online, the government's online, the university's online, and lots of people are online. Now, what would it mean for our communities to be online? With cyberspace as a commons rather than a corporate marketplace, what does democracy look like? We're urging you to find out, get involved, starting right here in eChicago. We're very eager to hear your thoughts today and tomorrow and your ideas for eChicago 2013. So welcome, and we hope that you will take this as an instruction to speak up in your sessions and with each other during the breaks. Now I want to turn to the back cover. This is something that's been in formulation for several years. We call it a Community Technology Manifesto, and we're applying it to Chicago here with this map. We dedicate ourselves to become difference makers. An information revolution is underway, leading global transformation of health, education, business, culture, and the diverse activities of our daily lives. This revolution cannot and will not bypass any underserved or low-income community. Every person and every neighborhood is impacted and therefore challenged to act. We rely on cyber democracy, collective intelligence, and information freedom. Cyber democracy means universal access. Every person, every community organization able to make full use of new technologies. Collective intelligence means hearing all voices, all of us uploading as well as downloading. Information freedom means that online information is findable, easy use, and requires no special permission to access. With these values, we will work together so all our communities and community organizations can communicate, represent themselves online, and use digital technology to create cyber power for social change. This manifesto originated in Toledo, Ohio, and has collected signatures in Champaign, Illinois, and I would say now in Chicago. Let's debate it and see if it can serve Chicago, and it is online. I think the rest of what I was going to say here has been said already, so I want to just say again, we welcome you to get fully engaged in this discussion, to make this conference your own, and to take the leadership. That goes for everybody in the room, and for those people who are online, We're very glad to have you in both spaces, here and in cyberspace. Great. Let's begin. The first person to speak after me is going to be Hoereth from the University of Illinois at Chicago.
Thanks, Kate. My name is Hoereth. I'm the director of the Institute for Policy and Civic Engagement here at UIC. And on behalf of the University of Illinois at Chicago, I'd like to say welcome. That's pretty much my job. But I'm not going to walk away from the mic without commenting on the theme for today's conference, which I can't tell you how excited I am about the conversations that are going to happen today. And the theme really got me thinking. I think the theme, I'll just make sure I say it correctly, planning for change based on high-speed internet, challenges us to think about infrastructure behind the access to the internet and technology that most of us, not all of us, but most of us enjoy. This theme and the conversations, as Kate mentioned, put the public library back in what I think is rightful place at the center of the conversation about public access to technology. And when I read the theme, I thought back to my first experience accessing public technology at a public library in my hometown of Long Beach, California, as a high school student, actually junior high, I think. My typing class was the first class to switch over from using an actual typewriter to using a computer. And once I learned the word processing software, WordStar, anyone remember that? WordStar, it didn't make sense for me to ever use a typewriter again. So I sought out where I could use a computer to type up my paper, and where there was a printer connected to it as well. And we didn't have a computer in our home, even though my father was in the information technology business, and I knew no one who did. So the public library was the only place where you could get that access. So that was, nearly 30 years ago. But have things really changed that much? The public library, there are multiple sources of access to the physical infrastructure for technology. But that matters less now. It's really more about the flow of information and access to that flow and understanding how to use that flow. That's really critical in today's society and the way things have changed over the last 30 years. And so really talking about how the role of the public library in that access is critical. And so I think while the theme challenges us to think about these infrastructure investments that have happened, certainly on the conference program, you can see all the money that's been invested. The question is, now what? What do we do with that? Do those investments alone solve these stubborn and enduring challenges of digital divide, incongruent knowledge of how you use information, even if you can access it, and other problems related to that? So I'm really looking forward to the conversations today. There are many people looking at the program who are dealing with these issues in creative and very collaborative ways. So thank you and welcome.
Thanks very much, Joe. It's really nice to have folks here on this campus to work with on this conference. Now I'm really pleased to introduce to you Joyce Latham. You have her bio in your program, so I'm not going to go through that, but she is here from the University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee, their School of Information Studies. And one of the things she wanted me to mention this morning, because it's so new, is that she is in charge of their public library
Public library leadership concentration.
Public library leadership concentration. So she's thinking about these issues all the time. Please help me in welcoming her, Joyce Latham.
I want to begin by congratulating you for having a governor who actually accepts the stimulus money to extend the network in the state. Our governor, for hopefully not much longer, of course, rejected those funds and sent them back to Washington. So you may have gotten a little bit of that as well. When Kate talked to me about coming in and talking about my perspectives as a historian of Chicago Public Library and as a former administrator in Chicago Public Library. I was thinking about how to pull these concepts together. And the one thing, the theme that came out when I think about the historical activism of Chicago Public Librarians, which is something you don't know about. There is a reason they don't tell us these stories, all right? Norton Long, who was a professor of political science, once said that the idea of providing open access to ideas is a radically subversive act. And of course it is. So public libraries are radically subversive institutions. So of course they're going to shut us down. And so what we want to talk about is what the history has been in Chicago about how librarians have functioned as advocates for their communities. And also we'll talk a little bit about what the technology impetus was when I was the director of IT at CPL. And so let's start. What we're going to talk about this morning, I have reading glasses. I'll go back and forth with these very sexy reading glasses. All right. The public library and the public good, that's what this is about. It is not about the political good. It is about the public good. So we'll talk about activist librarianship. I'll look at a historical overview of CPL, using the concepts of intellectual freedom. And when I reframe the concept of intellectual freedom into open access to enable it to flow more fluidly, I think, into our current environment. So I'll talk about the critical events of 1937, which of course we have to talk about. The relationship to current library practice, open access as a public good, how we forklifted Chicago Public Library into the modern digital age back in the 90s. It was a major undertaking, and the staff did it. And I'll talk about the CPL website, the original version, which has an incredible amount of information on it about the city of Chicago, which has now been kind of lost. And if we have time, I'll talk about our family-friendly libraries debacle and the 21st century librarian that I see. All right, I'm taking a quote from Randy Storch, who was a student of Jim Barrett, who's a historian of Chicago down in Champaign, as we call it. Chicago's traditions of political activism and labor radicalism date from the late 19th century. The city was the site of Haymarket, the 8-hour day movement, the Pullman boycott. It was the birthplace of the IWW and the American Communist Party. All right, so what we know about Chicago is that it has an embedded radical footprint that exists already. John Fitzpatrick, the Chicago Federation of Labor, a major leader in organizing white-collar workers in Chicago. Also, what we have in Chicago is the key institutions of professional librarianship. So the ALA is here, was originally housed at CPL. Carl Roden was the head of CPL, was the treasurer of ALA for like 10 years, and also president in 1927. And of course, the University of Chicago had the first doctoral program in librarianship. That was established back in the 1920s. So this is, why look at Chicago? Because Chicago is emblematic of activist engagement on behalf of communities when we talk about librarianship. CPL established 1872. The thing to know is that there are 11 different agencies involved in the establishment of CPL. There's a state, the city, the Civil Service Commission. There were 2 separate pension funds, the Chicago School District, the Chicago Park District. All of them had a part to play in the operations of the library. State law granted local government agencies the right to establish local libraries. determine governance structure as well as the tax rate. And then the mayor had the right to appoint the boards, and then the civil service to determine the hiring practices. So it's a hodgepodge kind of institution, kind of giving obedience to a lot of different power structures that exist within the city. The commissioners, Poole, Hill, Legler, Roden, Echicago, Latham, Wright, Sager, Rudd, Duff, Dempsey, and now we have a new one. I, of course, served with this one, who I think had a vision that she was able to enact. We don't know what Commissioner Bannon's vision is as yet, but I can speak to Dempsey's, or part of Dempsey's anyway. You don't really know everything that she was thinking. So the first librarian was Poole, came to Chicago from Cincinnati, where he was the head librarian. Poole brought a commitment of broad access to a range of materials. So what we have to begin with is at the very beginning, the first librarian, the head librarian, the first commissioner, had this commitment to broad access. He was followed by Frederick Hill, and Hill was chased out by a study that was done by the women's clubs in Chicago, and who did a study of what other cities were doing with their libraries, and found Hill wasn't doing enough. So they kind of suggested that Chicago Public needed a new director. And so that's when we got Legler. And Legler, of course, was a major figure within the library profession when he was hired. He came out of Wisconsin, which was known as driven by outreach and a commitment to public service. And he was an activist librarian. So we have, two of the first three commissioners, they weren't then, but what we would call them now, were committed to real engagement with the community on the part of the librarians. Roden was the chief librarian from 1918 to 1950. He was a child of German immigrants. He had a law degree from Chicago University College of Law, and as I said, he was president and longtime treasurer of the American Library Association. And I talk about him because he's the one that was running the library when I'm going to talk about all of this resistance which came from inside the library. Abe Corman was chief of the foreign department, what they called the foreign department in Chicago back in the 1920s, 30s, and early 40s. He was a graduate of the University of Chicago. He joined CPL in 1916, and he served continuously until his accidental death in 1945. And his accidental death has all the earmarks for a really good mystery novel. Because Abe Corman established the Chicago Public Library Union. This is in 1937. You all don't know that, do you? He established the union in 1937, and he was walking on his way to the union office when he was hit by a car. Hit and run. So I think there's a great mystery novel in there. What happened? The guy that hit him was never found. He had a brief leave of absence in 1935. He was fluent in Russian and Yiddish. He applied to be appointed to the Russian Commission, and it's like, well, what Russian Commission? There are lots of them. We don't know. And it's just part of Roden's correspondence that he wrote a letter. Roden wrote a letter for Corman to support his application. Apparently, he never got it. The Foreign Language Department faced some major intellectual freedom challenges in 1936 from members of the Polish and Russian communities. Not all members of the Polish community and not all members of the Russian community, but there were some who were concerned that there was too much communistic and pornographic material there. And so the Russian community argued that there was a strong communistic influence in the management of the Russian section, which of course would have been Corman's section, and that the works of Trotsky, Lenin, and Marx predominate, and that this constituted a subtle way of spreading communistic propaganda among Americans. And of course, since most of it was in Russian, I don't know how many Americans could actually read it. But so both groups were requesting removal of those materials. Preston Bradley was on the CPO board at this point in time, and he was the chair of the Committee on Library. And here's some info about him. So he was the one that conducted the investigation into these charges. Other board members included Leo Lerner. Jenny Franklin Perlin was the only woman on the board, and Joseph Fleming was a local lawyer. He was the president of the board. So a lot of people saw the Chicago Public Library Board as a fairly liberal board, primarily because of Bradley and Lerner. But most of the other members of the board at that point in time would be considered fairly conservative, fairly mainstream. So, as a result of this investigation by Bradley and company, there was the first intellectual freedom statement issued by the Chicago Public Library. This predates all other documents cited as the source of the ALA's intellectual freedom policy. The first one came out of Chicago in 1936. And while we can consider it not exactly a radical document, it was the first time that a library claimed authority for itself to determine its collection. This is very important. It's going to be very important in about 3 minutes, that this Board of Trustees said that the library determines what is part of its collection. Now, as we know, those of us who go to library school are told that the first intellectual freedom policy came out of Des Moines, Iowa. No, it's a false claim. They actually copied Chicago. So, and why don't we know about this? Well, Forrest Spalding, who was the director of Des Moines, was very outgoing and advocated his policies. I mean, he was making, copies and sending it around to people and saying, look at our library Bill of Rights. Chicago didn't do that. Chicago, as we know, Chicago Public Library continues to be more of a internal operation and doesn't talk a lot about the things that it does, which is probably unfortunate for Chicago because it does so much. So we have this original Chicago Public Library Board policy passed in 1946. And then we have this event in 1937 where George Patterson, who was one of the local CIO organizers, said that he was present at the strike at the Republic Steel plant down on the south side. And he said, as I've always testified from the very first day, the police shot and then they gassed us and then they clubbed us. So what we have around the story of the Memorial Day Massacre is originally everybody said, well, yeah, the police, they were just breaking up these rowdy radicals who were disruptive and interfering with the development of commerce in the city. But this is from the Encyclopedia of Chicago, and you notice that it's kind of a soft description of what happened. 10 protesters died, 90 were injured, and everybody said, well, the police didn't have any option, but there was a problem. It was filmed. It was caught on film what actually happened. And so, with the filming, it was a guy in St. Louis, a reporter in St. Louis who saw the film and began to write the other side of the story. And it came up. It became part of the federal investigation into union activities. And it really called into question some of the corporate representation of what these strikers were doing. So because there was film, there was proof that the police department's story was not accurate, and that it really was a bunch of people, picnicking in front and organizing a protest line in front of the doors, and that it was really very low key until the police came along and caused the disruption. So here's this alternative perception. Well, what do you think Chicago did? Any guesses? They banned the film, of course. They banned the film. They said that film cannot be shown in Chicago. Where do you think they showed it? The John Toman branch had a community forum, and the forum members, we can talk a little bit about them. They began with 5 members. They were leaders in the community. The Toman branch was predominantly Czech immigration, Czech immigrants, or second generation, and they created their own community forum to have discussion. And I have a whole article about this that you can read. We published it. It's coming. Yeah, this one's coming out in a publication soon. So you're getting a preliminary look at this. So there was a community forum, and they had these incredible discussion groups once a month. And I mean, they had, if anyone here know the size of the John Toman branch? Does anybody know how big it is? Bruce does. It's little, all right? And the smallest crowd they ever had at one of these was 58 people. They had up to 400 people at one of these when Paul Douglas spoke at the branch. So they used to literally just move all the children's stuff out of the way, and they borrowed chairs from undertakers in order to have enough seats. Eventually, the board authorized some money for them to buy some of the stuff, some of the chairs. But Helen Hamill, who was the branch head at the John Toman branch, talked about the forum committee, which was drawn from the community, all men, by the way, for this particular group, as being, I love this quote, well-balanced politically, 2 being conservative, 2 radical, and 3 liberal. I mean, so, back in the 30s, this was how we thought about our communities. We included radicals within our community assessment. We didn't eliminate them. They weren't on the fringe. They were part of our community. Rod Ginsburg was the person who organized it. You can read a little bit about him here. He attended Chicago, University of Chicago, and completed his bachelor's degree there. He was the one that pulled the forum together and organized it. He also then will become the one to protect the forum to the Board of Trustees. But a man by the name of William Rodriguez of the Chicago Civil Liberties Union gave a talk at the forum on the dangers of fascism in the U.S. And it featured a viewing of what they called then the South Chicago Steel Strike, or what later became known as the Memorial Day Massacre. So they showed the film, the banned film, in the library. All right. It was John Vetter, Charles Vetter, was a member of the forum committee, was a labor organizer, and he arranged for the film to be shown in March of 1938. And 179 people were there in that little branch library to see that film. All right. Now, do you think that went unnoticed? No, of course not. Otherwise, I wouldn't have a story. So in January of 1939, the forum then came under attack by residents who objected to the discussion topics. And Ginsburg goes back to the CPL board and argues for the First Amendment right of free speech. So this is a Czech immigrant going to a governmental institution and arguing his community's right to free speech. Right? Big deal. It's a big deal. So the board of directors, in keeping with their 1936 precedent, affirmed the right of the 4 participants to uncensored speech, and made it clear it was a matter of library policy and not simply applicable to the forum itself. So they extended the application of their 1936 policy to incorporate all forms of speech and to apply it throughout the entire library, right? So this again is a major expansion of the library's claim of authority in terms of access to ideas, that radical access to ideas being a base for the practice of librarianship in the city of Chicago. Right? This is the story that we don't, that I'm trying to tell, right? So, of course, the person behind all this is our friend Abe Corman from the Foreign Language Department. So he was involved in the development of the intellectual freedom policy. He worked with the John Toman Branch Forum, and he was the person who established the first CIO union at the Chicago Public Library, the State, County, and Municipal Workers of America. The original membership was 11 people. You needed 10 to get a charter from the CIO at that point. And they really became advocates not only for the librarians, and this was one of their platforms, that they advocated not only for the librarians, but for the people of Chicago. And this came out of this State, County, Municipal Workers Union, which was originally organized by a social worker in New York. And so the idea was that we advocate not just for ourselves, but also for our clients, for our patrons, for our service population. All right, so it had a dual platform to it always, throughout the life of that union. And the union argued for a living wage. It argued for integration of services in the city. It was an actively integrated organization. And it argued for public service, that the focus of the organization should be on service to the public. They were also involved with the development of the South Chicago branch. Well, why would we develop the South Chicago branch? Well, the reason we developed the South Chicago branch was because the Memorial Day Massacre happened in Chicago, South Chicago. And one of the things that came out of that, after it became obvious that the police had misrepresented their actions at that point in time, and the reason, one of the things they began to talk about in the city was, how do we provide adult services? In other words, how do we prevent the unions from dominating adult education of workers on the South Side? So they needed an alternative strategy, and one of the things they looked at was developing a library on the South Side that would be focused on adult services instead of children's services, and that would have ties to the local unions. That would be the real mission of that adult services library. One of the first branch managers at that library was Lowell Martin, who, if you're a library student, you may know who he is. He was one of the first people to advocate for community assessment strategies in developing library services. So he didn't do much of that. He was still a grad student. But he got dipped in the sense of community activism by being engaged on the south side of the city. The people who were really active in South Chicago were 2 women, Edith Walter and Edith Walensky. And if anybody can find any more information about these women, I would really love to know. Edith Walter was the branch head in the south side, and Edith Walensky was the public relations director. But what does it mean to be a public relations? Well, what she did was she went out, she talked to people, and she talked to the unions. She and Walter went to union meetings. They coordinated programming SWAC, the Steelworkers Organizing Committee on the South Side with Joe Cook. Joe Cook was an African-American organizer. So what you have is this incredible coordination of issues and strategies taking place on the South Side of Chicago through this library. And one of the most amazing things that they did, and what I think this picture represents, we aren't sure, it is a picture of Walensky, is she organized the first joint meeting of all of the labor heads in the city. So she pulled them all together into one room. And they worked on a program to be developed through the library called the it was labor focus, I suppose. But it'll come to me in 10 minutes. But the idea is that here you have librarians going out into the community, meeting with the players in the community, assessing community need, and coming back and developing strategies that represent the community. You know, are we talking about books here? Are we talking about books? We're not talking about books. We're talking about active engagement with communities to address community issues. Right? Okay. So, the foundational values that we have that come out of this, and this is the cultural center where we used to have a real nice library. So, was the importance of the community. The foundational values, as the librarians determine their strategy found. So, importance of the community, the right to know. The commitment to everybody's right to know. All right, autonomy. The autonomy of the institution to determine its own strategies. And advocacy. Representing the needs of the community back to the power structure. That power structure being either the administration of the library or engaging with politicians in the community level, the alderman, the mayor's office. All of this is the librarians. It's not coming from the administration. So how does this then tie into what I did when I was here in Chicago? And I was brought in specifically to function as a kind of a liaison between the professional librarians and the technical staff, because there wasn't what we would say highly developed discussions going on between the two of them. So my job was to try to create a bridge there, so that the needs and the vision of the librarians could be repackaged and developed by the technical staff. Right? And that's what I did. I was originally hired for 3 years. I ended up staying for 6 because it took twice as long to get it done as everybody thought. But we really achieved a great deal of it. And the reason that it happened is because of the staff. It's because of the librarians. The administration supported it, which was a difference between some of the previous commissioners and this one, is that the administration was highly committed to enabling the diffusion of technology in the library. And there were ways that we did this. I'm going to talk about too. I'm going to talk about how we first brought up digital databases, and then I'm going to talk about how we brought up the website. And those are the two things that happened under my tenure. There were a lot of other things that happened, including flights with but the two most visible things, I think, are the delivery of online databases to the public was a major step for librarians to be taking at that point in time. And also the delivery of the website and the reason for the development of the website, which is critically important. So the online databases, you know, if we stop to think about it, you know, the databases were one of those, what we call gatekeeper resources. You know, the librarians knew how to use them, but nobody else did. And so the librarians could help you. And so the vision, part of the strategic plan that came out of Dempsey's first 2 years as commissioner was to enable public access to online databases. And it was kind of one of those long-term things. Oh, we'll get to it eventually. But what we did was we moved it up and we prioritized it and we made it a big focus of the first technology rollout that we did. When we replaced, we go back. Yeah, see that tandem back there? That's a tandem mainframe computer. All right. And we had one of those. It's why we had 99.5% uptime on our system, was because we had a tandem. Really expensive. The tandem is the platform that's used for ATM machines. Okay, so it gives you an idea. I mean, we have really high-end technology. But you also see in that picture, what do you see? But you see a dumb terminal, right? So you have to imagine that all these dumb terminals were distributed throughout the city. Now, the dumb terminal was not so dumb. Because what you did when you ran on a dumb terminal was you were really on the mainframe. You were just, you know, all the dumb terminal did was display all the power that was in place for the mainframe. So even when we ended up replacing all of these dumb terminals with PCs, we had patrons who still wanted their dumb terminals because they knew the difference between what happened on a PC and what happened on a dumb terminal. So we had to keep dumb terminals around for a long time. So in order to deliver the online databases, we had to roll out a major project, which was replacing the dumb terminals and public access with PCs and training staff in how to maintain PCs. My colleague, Kathleen Weidel, started what we called computer camp. It was based on a model that I had learned in North Carolina when I was working there. The state of North Carolina launched, we had a group called the MuggleNets. It was the microcomputer users group of librarians in the state of North Carolina. It was some atrocious acronym. And we had camp every summer. We had a week-long camp of librarians. And we used to go and we would teach each other what we knew. So you have a bunch of librarians, about 100 librarians in the state, coming together. And I knew DBase, so I would teach DBase, but I didn't know Lotus, so I would take the track in Lotus. And then we'd share information about what kind of applications we were developing. It was a different time. It was before the dissemination of information about technology became corporatized. It was when we still controlled that. And we brought that model into Chicago public, and we used it to create computer camps where we trained the librarians in how to use technology. Because they needed to have some information when we put these PCs out on the floor. The other part of this, though, was great. We're going to put the PCs out. People can sit there and spend all day at the PC because they're going to be hand copying all this stuff. So we had to have printers. Well, our budget didn't have printers built into it, so the foundation provided money to put the printers, attached printers. At that point in time, you had to have, each PC had to have a local printer. So attached printers to the public access PCs, and also underwrote free printing for the public. Now, it got to be a little dicey when some of the guys came in and printed off some of that stuff. But for the most part, that was a really proactive approach to enabling people to have access to the information that they needed to develop their own knowledge base. All right. So we moved from being gatekeepers of information to being enablers of access. That's the transition. That's what happened. All right? And some of us held onto that gatekeeper mentality really hard. And some of us were very happy to let it go. All right? But that's where we're going. So that I think is a sign of when our mission changed. When we became the enablers instead of the gatekeepers. All right, this was our other project, and this was something that I cared deeply about. And this is what the website first looked like. This is the earliest capture from the Wayback Machine. It looks a lot like the very early, what preceded them, which was the Gopher sites. So it kind of looks like a Gopher site. If you don't know what a Gopher site is, don't worry, it didn't last long. So, but this was originally developed here at UIC. UIC worked with the staff of the Chicago Public Library, the computer services folks, and the librarians involved in this to develop this original site. And none of these links are actually live, so I'm not going to click on any of these. But this is basically what it looked like. And you'll notice the databases are up. They're being delivered through the website. And the vision that drove this was the idea of the 83rd branch. At this point in time, I think we had 82, Chicago Public had 82 branches. I don't know what the number is now. I think it's down to 76. Soon become 10, right? But the idea behind this was to develop a virtual branch. And other libraries were trying to do the same thing. But we really took it on. The Computer Services Department and the librarians involved in this really took it on as a major commitment. And I really allocated a lot of money from the department to make sure that this happened. How did that happen? I guess something did just work. No, we don't want to do that. We go to the next slide. All right. So, the history of this, the 83rd branch emerged from an LSCA grant called, and it's right here in the title of the grant, Building Public Access to the Internet. All right, this is a grant that was awarded by the state in 1994, which enabled us, oh gosh, I only have 5 minutes left, which enabled us to develop this project. So it was a partnership with the UIC Great Cities program, Sharon Hogan, it's Tom Jevick, who did a lot of the one-on-one with Ellen Starkman, who was the computer services representative to this, and Ed continues to be of great help to all things library-like. Chicago Public Library staff, Ellen, Marcia, Kathleen, Steve Jones, who was the web programmer, who would go home at night and work on designs for the website. Lyle Benedict, Ellen O'Brien, William Price, Bob Stone, Bruce, who's here, and Glenn Humphreys. All of these folks were essential. It came from the staff. The folks were essential to the development of this 83rd branch. So let's take a look at the old website. This is what a website should look like. All right? I used to teach web design. I'm sorry. I have ideas about what websites are supposed to look like. And so what this talks about the splash page. But one of them really, and what pains me about the Chicago Public Library site as it is now, is this incredible content that was developed by the librarians that's now hidden, not visible, not recognized, not known. And this online collection of this digital collection of vetted, authoritative information about the city itself. All right? The Chicago timeline, the death, disturbances, disasters, and disorders, which was extremely popular with young people doing their Chicago history projects. You know? And the quality, what's amazing to me is, before we go down this one, the quality of the information that's part of this site. So all of these are live clicks, and then if you go into, which was the one I always used to use as the example of, oh, and then somebody stole it and wrote a book about it called Devil in the White City or something. The Monster of 63rd Street serial killer. So what you have here is this incredible detail, and then you have the resources that are part of the collection. You know that you can. So if you want more information, the indication about the resources right there. Highly developed, extremely sophisticated pathfinders that really reflect, I think, a lot of the quality. A way of making the collection visible through a digital interface. A really wonderful resource. The kids and teens page, you know, very, very friendly interface. The artist, I forget the name of the artist who did the artwork on this, was, I don't know if you remember. But again, you know, clicking into ways of making the resource valuable, not to the librarians, but to the public, giving the public access. So I only have 2 minutes. All right. So it grew. I mean, it was huge. Library site by the time the staff got finished with it. So there was the battle for open access that we had with family-friendly libraries who were staging protests. And we went through a process with that, and we can talk about that later if the opportunity presents itself. But I want to close with this, the idea of the 21st century librarian. And this is what I teach about public librarianship. And, you know, I have students that go through changes about this. But I believe that the public library is an agent of social justice in the world. And that when we accept that mission, we enlarge our communities. And that the activism is focused on that the right to know is a human right. And this is taken from IFLA, the International Federation of Library Associations. Everybody has a right to the resources they need to be able to know. All right? People have a right to the resources that they need. That the cultural and intellectual needs and aspirations of our communities are the priority for the library. Not our vision of what should happen, their vision of what should happen. And what kind of expertise and tools do we have to make that happen? Right? The vision that we bring into this is that we understand the cultures we are working with, that we buy into it, we're part of it. We engage with our communities at all levels. We don't leave anybody out. We don't determine that anyone is insignificant. We don't say that somebody's perspective is more important than somebody else's. We celebrate our communal assets. Too often we focus on what a community needs and forget about what it already has. And that's what we need to know. We do surveys about what do you need from us, but we never ask, what do you have and how can we partner? That has to be an essential part of how we shape our mission. We use that to help anticipate needs, and we provide leadership. We stop waiting for other people to tell us how to be there. We take the lead in being there. We take the lead in establishing strategies within our communities. I have stories about this, and I can tell those stories if you ask me. I think the U-Media program is a great example of expanding the reach of the profession. I love that. I have my students look at it every semester, and I also show them this. That the idea that the librarians are the ones out there serving the 99%, I think, is the actual encapsulation of our mission. And I would even say we serve the 100%, even if the other 1% doesn't really know they need us. They'll learn if they lose us. They'll be sorry. So with that, that's it. Let's do that.
My name was up there, but I was only just one of a few people. But Joyce,
Can't hear you.
I'm sorry, I was one of the ones up there, but I was just one among a few people who worked with Joyce, and she gave us, we had incredible access to developing this project, and it seemed very natural to us, and it was all vetted, and we had access to the not the live server, but it was, I'm sorry.
It's better. I worked with Joyce. My name was up there. And I'm just one among many. That Joyce and her team, and Ellen particularly, and Steve, and Marcia. They're the ones. Joyce gave us the freedom to work, develop these pages. Steve was a computer programmer, and he did an incredible amount of work. And it seemed like a natural step. I mean, I was in library school in the 70s, and I took statistics on a dumb terminal, and I learned basic on a dumb terminal. This was really the first opportunity that I was out there working with other people in the system. So it was, when you look back, it was very unique, and it was very interesting, and I was very pleased to be a part of it.
In order for the online crowd to hear your questions and comments, this will be right here. But any other questions and comments for Joyce? Yeah, Patty.
Hi, I'm Patty Siebert. I'm the Deputy Director of the Chicago Public Library Foundation. And I know that Brian Bannon has only been here for 5 weeks. He's certainly done an incredible amount of work in that time. And I just want to reassure everyone that he's coming out of, a long time ago, the Gates Foundation Library Program, the San Francisco Public Library, the Seattle Public Library. He is an enormously technologically savvy guy who has a huge heart for the community, and I don't want anybody to think that the direction that Joyce is talking about, all the good things that libraries should be, that Commissioner Bannon would be anything different from that. I mean, he's totally committed to that, very strategic, very energetic, wonderful young guy. So, and I don't think that we're in any danger of going down to 10 libraries. So, thank you. I just wanted to put in a good word for our new commissioner.
Thanks, Patty. Yes, question in the back?
Hi, my name is Abdul Khan. I'm from the University of Milwaukee, Urbana. Thank you for a very wonderful talk. I have a question about library schools and information schools. In reference to your foundational values and your sense of social justice, it seems there's a tension between the information science people who are oriented toward military contracts, privacy, security issues, homeland security, etc., and corporate utility for their skills. On the other hand, librarians, as you have told us, engaged in the community, serving really a different constituency, the broader community. And yet both of these sort of cultures exist in tension inside.
Intention is right.
And so I'm just wondering how you see the future developing, because as we know in this city, they're closing libraries. We're closing the time that libraries are open. And so I'm just wondering how you see the survival of the traditions and values of library education.
Thank you. One of the reasons that the University of, at the School of Information Studies at UWM started the public library leadership concentration was because so many other schools are abandoning specific studies about public libraries. IMLS, the Institute for Museum and Library Services, does not fund research into public libraries. The focus is very much on information. And information is a commodity. I mean, it's been commodified, and that's how we talk about it. That's why I like to talk about the right to know, because the right to know changes the conversation. If we participate in discussions about information, we're abandoning our field. We're abandoning the field of practice, and we're allowing those folks who see information as a means to grant money, I think, and very much so, and validly so. I mean, there's nothing wrong with the information scientists being information scientists. What's wrong is when the information scientists think that librarians should be information scientists. That's the problem. You know, and so that's why I feel we really need to actively engage in defining our field of practice, which is much larger than information. It's cultural, and it's historic, and it involves emotion and feeling, and the scientific model doesn't go there. And so I think we need to develop a new way of framing and a new way of talking about public libraries so that the information scientists don't do it for us. I'm fully in favor of information science. Let it be there. I'm sorry that it's made so that it is present at a cost to public libraries at this point in time. But I think we can reclaim that. And I think it's through the community, through actively promoting community engagement, that that's going to happen.
Brian, if you don't mind coming up here so that the online audience can hear you.
Hi, my name is Brian Wilson. I'm a GISA student down in Champaign.
Brian Wilson, what a name.
I get that sometimes,
Yeah, I'm sorry.
So kind of following up from the last question, my question is just, you talked about providing access to information via computers, and I was just wondering if you think some of the new, fairly new, powerful search tools like Google and Bing, other search engines, do you think they help provide access, or do you think they limit people? Do you think they filter information out?
I think what they do is they privilege certain classes of information that have paid to be privileged, and that's the problem. So it's not, before you could buy premier space on Google to prioritize your search, your hit. When Google truly thought it did no evil, then I think what we had was a valid strategy. And Google certainly has had an influence on OPAC. I originally went to PhD school to do OPAC design, and that didn't last long. But certainly, when we look at how the search results are structured, that's where the issue is. Who structures them? How do they get prioritized? What actually drives the hit set that you get?
Can I just ask a quick corollary to that? So what do we do about it? On one hand, we're trying to build IPL, But if you could speak for a moment about digital literacy and what that ought to include, because if someone isn't literate about how Google works, then they're a victim to what Google serves up.
And I think that's something that I know that library schools are starting to address in terms of educating librarians to be proponents of information literacy, of building that into programming at the library level. We're building it in academia. We're building it into freshman educational programs. What information literacy is and how to really make people accountable for what it is they think they've found. And I think we need to keep thinking about how to push that down further and further into the school systems. Everybody Googles, everybody should know what that means. Repeated sentences. And, it'll happen. So much of this is new to us. We still have, we didn't anticipate, ebooks. Who anticipated that ebooks could bring the whole industry down? There are a lot of things that we still have to figure out how to work with. I don't think that means we abandon them, but I think we have to be much more intelligent about our strategies. And one thing about librarians, in my experience, and many years of experience, is that they tend to depend too much on being perceived as good. We're good. I had an assistant director who said that to me once. Well, they're going to fund us because we're good. No, they're not going to fund us because we're good. They're going to fund us because we have good ideas about what to do. But the idea that because we're good, we deserve to be here is not going to be what gets it done. So we have to look at what the requirements are of a new practice.
Hello, Noah Lindstrom, also from down in Champaign, Urbana. I had a question about this 83rd branch, this virtual branch, and its appearance from the CPL's website. As you probably know, we're living in a culture of planned obsolescence, which is driven by corporate needs and not by community needs. And the reality is that public librarians are following in the footsteps of this planned obsolescence. And I think the disappearance of the 83rd branch is a good example of how that phenomenon works. So thinking back historically, we also saw that the 1930s was largely obliterated by Henry Luce's American century in the post-World War II period. So in both cases, the case of the 83rd branch in the 1930s, we see innovative things that were largely obliterated by corporate priorities. And I guess what I'd ask you is, reflecting on this obliteration, or largely obliterated innovative things by corporate priorities, what do you think is, what solutions do you see based on this historical study that you've done? It's interesting. Many of you probably don't know that the Library History Roundtable is now looking for a place to publish the research of library historians, because Libraries in the Cultural Record, which was the journal which published library history, has now been taken over and dedicated to information. So we continue to see this erosion of our own story and the places where the story gets to be told. I think we have to be proactive in the visibility. And we were talking about the wiki very briefly. How do we use these now? When we talk about open access, when we talk about open publishing, when we talk about open resources, we have the avenue that we need to counter the corporatization of our culture. We have the alternative avenues. Are we going to use them? One of the things that concerns me about sucking librarian time up into shelving books is that they then don't have the time to do this kind of resource development, to do this kind of public education. Do you think that's an accident?
remember what Norton Long said. Access to ideas is radically subversive. You know, the way to, you just shut it all down. You get people so tied up in the mundane that they can't engage at the level of the progressive. And I think, and you know, I think the people that are making these decisions aren't even cognizant of what the impact of those decisions is. I don't think they see the fact that we're being diverted from our mission, and that diversion has probably been developed by ALEC. You know, it's probably their fault. We're blaming them for everything else. Let's blame them for it. ALEC is probably much more recognizable in Wisconsin than in Illinois. And they're the think tank that's developing Republican strategies. So we have to choose to do it. And we have to do things like what Steve Jones did, which was go home at night and work on this. You know, because our 40-hour work week is going to be taken up by other service. So we have to do computer camps with each other. You know, we have to come together and find ways to develop the alternative information strategies. You know, if we say that our mission stops at 5 o'clock, then we've lost already. We've bought right into the corporatization of our profession. We can't do it that way. And you know, the folks that worked on this stuff didn't stop with fun. They definitely did not stop with fun. Really. Time.
It is time for us all to start talking with each other during the break and in the subsequent sessions. Thank you so much for
Thank
coming.
you.